This meeting of the Subordinate Legislation Committee. I welcome you to the 16th meeting in 2013, if everyone could turn their phones off. I'm in the chair because we've received apologies from Nigel Don. Bruce Crawford, I understand, is here as a substitute for Nigel and has confirmed that he is so. Let's move to agenda item 1, which is to welcome Christian Allard to the committee. And in accordance with section 3 of the Code of Conduct, I invite Christian Allard to declare any relevant interests.
Thank you very much for the welcome, and I have no interest to declare.
Thank you very much. It would be appropriate to record our thanks to a previous member of the committee, Jim Eadie. So agreed. Agenda item 2. On taking items in private. It's proposed the committee takes items 7 and 8 in private. Item 7 is consideration of the committee's fourth quarterly report for the parliamentary year 2012-13. And item 8 is consideration of the committee's approach to the scrutiny of the Children's Hearing Scotland Act 2011 Rehabilitation of Offenders, Transitory Provisions Order 2013, SSI 2013/146. Do members agree to take items 7 and 8 in private? We're agreed. We're agreed. Agenda item 3, instruments subject to affirmative procedure. There's a drafting error in paragraph 1 of the Children's Legal Assistance Scotland Regulations 2013 draft at Regulation 3, which provides that the advice and assistance, brackets ABWOR Scotland Regulations 2003, are amended in accordance with the remainder of the regulation. Scottish Government accepts that Regulation 3 does not cite the title in accordance with Regulation 4 of the Scottish Statutory Instrument Regulations 2011, as it abbreviates assistance by way of representation to ABWOR. Does the committee therefore agree to draw the regulations to the attention of Parliament on the general reporting ground as it contains a drafting error? We're agreed. Does the committee also agree to note, however, that the Scottish Government considers it is clear which instrument is being referred to, as the footnote to Regulation 3.1 states the year and SSI number of the 2003 regulations? We're agreed. We come to Children's Hearing Scotland Act 2011 Movement Restriction Conditions Regulations 2013 draft. The meaning of Regulation 5.1 could be clearer. That paragraph provides that a children's hearing or a sheriff which has designated a person to monitor compliance with a compulsory supervision order or an interim compulsory supervision order which contains a movement restriction condition must, where that person is no longer within the provision made under Regulation 4, vary the designation accordingly. The Scottish Government intends that the requirement to vary the designation applies when a person designated in relation to monitoring compliance in terms of paragraph 1c of Regulation 4 has commenced the monitoring but subsequently no longer carries it out. Regulation 5.1 could be clearer in implementing that intention. Does the committee therefore agree to draw the attention of the Parliament to the regulations on reporting ground H as the meaning could be clearer? We're agreed. Come to Secure Accommodation Scotland Regulations 2013 draft. There appears to be a doubt as to whether Regulation 9 is intra vires. There appears to be a doubt whether that regulation can validly be made in the exercise of powers which have been conferred by Section 75 of the Children's Scotland Act 1995, but which have been subsequently amended by Schedule 5, Paragraph 2.8 and Schedule 6, Paragraph 1 of the Children's Hearing Scotland Act 2011 during the period before these provisions of the 2011 Act are commenced for the purposes of making these regulations. Does the committee agree to draw the regulations to the attention of the Parliament on reporting grounds E, as there is doubt as to whether Regulation 9 is intra vires? The committee is agreed. Does the committee agree to note, however, that the Scottish Government intends to commence the amendments to Section 75 of the 1995 Act before these regulations are made, following the approval of Parliament, but only for the purpose of making these regulations, and, if that is properly done, the doubt as to the virus should be removed. We're agreed. We come to agenda item 4, instruments subject to the negative procedure. And we start with the Welfare Reform Consequential Amendment Scotland No. 3 Regulations 2013, SSI 2013-142. Members will note in relation to this instrument, our legal advisers have suggested that the regulation raise a question of whether they relate to the matters which are reserved by Section F1 of Part 2 of Schedule 5 to the Scotland Act 1998, and as such, the committee may wish to report the regulations as raising a devolution issue. The same issue was raised in relation to the Council Tax Reduction Scotland Regulations 2012, the principal regulations which these regulations amend and which the committee has previously considered. The matter was also raised in connection with the Council Tax Reduction Scotland Amendment Regulations 2013, that's SSI 2013/48, and the Council Tax Reduction State Pension Credit Scotland Amendment Regulations 2013, that's SSI 2013/49. The Scottish Government's view is that the principal regulations do not relate to any of the reserved matters described in Section F1 of Part 2 of Schedule 5 to the Scotland Act 1998. When the committee considered the principal regulations and the amending regulations, a majority of the committee members preferred the Scottish Government's view. It is for the committee to decide whether it wishes to report the instrument or whether, as with the Council Tax Reduction Scotland Regulations 2012 and the amending regulations previously considered by the committee, it is content that no devolution issue has been raised. John.
Thank you, Convener. We have rehearsed these arguments before. While it has been the view of the committee in the past, the majority view of the committee in the past, I nonetheless would adhere to the view that I've taken previously, which is that this does indeed raise a devolution issue and that we should report this instrument accordingly because, to me, self-evidently, this does provide a benefit and therefore I maintain that position.
Bruce.
Well, I hear what John says, but I'm content that no devolution issue has been raised here. The Scottish Government's view is quite clear. It must follow that the UK Government's view would be similar, otherwise they would not have passed the legislation as it's been passed in terms of welfare reform through the UK Government. It's clearly, from my perspective, to do with a council tax issue, and it's not for the assistance of making social security provisions, so I'm content not to report any matter.
Mike?
Convener, you'll be aware as I am that we've discussed this matter at length and debated it at some length previously on a number of occasions, and I would therefore propose that we take a view on the proposition that the committee considers that the regulations are intra vires and that they should not be drawn to the attention of the Parliament.
Okay, I'll come back to a formal way of dealing with it, but that sounds a way we might deal with it. John?
Chair, as someone who probably agrees that there is a devolution issue here, and I think probably the Scottish Government has had the opportunity to come back and allay some of the fears if there was not a devolution. And you know, when we legal people are saying that there's some sufficient doubt as to whether these regulations have a proper legal basis, then I believe that, as Mr Scott and previously, that there is a devolution issue here.
Anyone else wish to make any comment before we perhaps...
Yes,
Hamzala.
I'm actually a little disappointed that the Parliament takes that view, considering we have suggested that there is an issue to be considered and they've been given an opportunity and they've come back with the same document. And what is interesting is this decision seems to be going down a party line rather than a line across the board that we normally make decisions on. So there's nothing that's been changed there to change my view from the last time, and I just think it's a lost opportunity to have addressed it. and I would wish them to consider once more, if at all possible.
Okay, clearly the committee is of more than one view, and we will need to formally put it to the committee to come to a conclusion. What Mike has put before us, I think I have a draft which that roughly follows. The proposition is that the committee considers that the regulations are intra-virus and should not be drawn to the attention of the Parliament. Are we agreed? No, we're not agreed. In that case, we will vote. Will those who are in favour of the proposition please show? Those against, please show. Abstentions? There are none. There are 4 in favour of the proposition. There are 3 votes against. The proposition is therefore carried. Thank you for your assistance on that. There are further regulations where there are no points that have been raised by our legal advisors. These are the Regulation of Care, Social Work Service Worker Scotland Amendment Order 2013, SSI 2013-141, Building Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2013, SSI 2013-143, Children's Legal Assistance Fees Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2013, SSI 2013-144, Children's Hearing Scotland Act 2011, Modification of Subordinate Legislation, Order 2013, SSI 2013-147, Children's Hearing Scotland Act 2011, Compulsory Supervision Orders, etc., Further Provision, Regulations 2013, SSI 2013-149. Is the committee content with these instruments? Okay. We're agreed. We come to agenda item 5, landfill tax Scotland. The purpose of this item is for the committee to consider the delegated powers in the landfill tax Scotland Bill at stage 1. In considering the bill, the committee is invited to agree the questions it wishes to raise with the Scottish Government on the delegated powers in the bill. It is suggested that these questions are raised in written correspondence. On the basis of the responses received, the committee would expect to consider a draft report at its meeting on the 11th of June. Section 5 defines what constitutes a disposal of material by way of landfill. Section 5.5 enables Scottish ministers by order to vary the meaning of the disposal of material by way of landfill. That order may modify any enactment, including the bill itself. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why it's necessary that this power permit the modification of any enactment instead of permitting only the modification of this section or the bill more generally, and why the negative procedure is considered to be appropriate when varying without textual amendment the meaning of the disposal of material by way of landfill other than by providing for something to be such a disposal when it would not otherwise be, given that the effect of so doing affects the basis of the charge to tax and so goes to the central principles of the bill. We're agreed? Yeah. Yes? Section 6 of the bill enables Scottish ministers to prescribe certain activities which take place on a landfill site as a taxable disposal. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why it is necessary that this power permit the modification of primary legislation, and why the negative procedure is considered to be appropriate when varying without textual amendment prescribed landfill activities other than providing for something to be such an activity when it would not otherwise be, given that the effect of so doing affects the basis of the charge to tax and so goes to the central principles of the bill. Agreed? Sections 7 to 10 of the bill provide that certain disposals are not to be taxable disposals, although they would otherwise meet the criteria set out in Section 3. In effect, these sections provide exemptions for certain disposals. Section 11 allows the Scottish ministers, by order, to provide that disposals which would otherwise be taxable are not taxable, and conversely, that disposals which would not otherwise be taxable are to be treated as taxable. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why it is necessary that this power permit the modification of any enactment, instead of permitting only the modification of sections 7 to 10 of the bill more generally, and why the negative procedure is considered to be appropriate when extending without textual amendment the scope of exemptions from landfill tax, given that the effect of so doing affects the basis of the charge to tax and so goes to the central principles of the bill. Agreed. The Scottish landfill tax would be payable at a lower rate where the material disposed of consists entirely of qualifying materials. Section 13.4 gives Scottish ministers power to list the materials which are to be qualifying materials in an order. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why it is considered that specifying the qualifying materials is a technical and administrative matter, given the effect which listing materials as qualifying materials has on a taxpayer's liability, and whether it would not be more appropriate for the affirmative procedure to apply to the exercise of this power, save in the circumstances where the provisional affirmative procedure already applies. Is that agreed? Yes. It's agreed. Section 16.1 of the bill makes the operator of an authorised landfill site the person liable to pay the tax on each taxable disposal. Section 17.1 enables the Scottish ministers to make regulations extending that liability to the controller of a landfill site. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why it is necessary that this power permit the modification of any enactment instead of permitting only the modification of the bill, and why it is considered appropriate that the extension of liability to controllers under this power be subject to the negative procedure unless primary legislation is textually amended, given that this involves the extension of tax liability to persons who would not otherwise be liable. We're agreed.
Yes, I think that would be, it would allow for clarity.
Thank you. We're agreed. Thank you. Sections 32 and 33 concern the keeping of records by registrable persons and about material at landfill sites. Section 32 confers power on the Scottish ministers to keep registrable persons to require registrable persons to preserve records of a prescribed description for up to 6 years. Section 33.1 confers a power to require persons to make records relating to material at landfill site. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government why the power to require record keeping relating to material at landfill sites does not specify the category of persons to whom the requirements can be applied, but instead allows the requirement to be imposed on a person? Agreed. Section 35.1 permits the tax authority to delegate any of its functions other than functions of legislating to the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. Does the committee agree to ask the Scottish Government to explain how the delegation of functions will be identified and recorded in the interests of transparency and accountability? Agreed. And that concludes agenda item 5.
On that, before we conclude,
Yes.
I think it would be worth adding, Convener, that in terms of when we asked the government this for an overall view of their perspective of how they've constructed the bill, not to improve what's already in the policy memorandum effectively, given that we are in new territory as a parliament here in terms of tax raising powers. Tax law does operate differently from other legislation. The Scottish Government could draw comparisons with the UK Government in terms of financial provisions that exist there. And obviously we've got a budget bill provision here. And just to help them explain, I think, to this committee why they've chosen the particular directions they have, and the way that tax law is designed to allow the flexibility for a government to respond following the passing either of a finance bill at Westminster or a budget bill here. I think it would be useful for some more contextual stuff around this discussion.
Is everyone content with that? That seems to make perfect sense. Yes? I'm getting nodding heads. Right, I'll move to agenda item 6. And that is an item of business to consider a draft annual report for the parliamentary year 11th of May 2012 to 10th of May 2013. Under Standing Rule 12.9 of under Rule 12.9 of Standing Orders, the committee is obliged to report to the Parliament at the end of each parliamentary year on its activities during that year. We have therefore before us a draft annual report for the parliamentary year 2013-14. The report will be published next month to coincide with the publication of all other committee annual reports. Does anyone wish to make any comment? No. Is the committee therefore satisfied with the contents of the annual report for 2012-2013? Yes, we are agreed. Thank you very much. I now move the meeting into private session.